Thank you. So this is being recorded. And so instead of making this as informal as I would probably make it for a room full of 6 people or 7 people, I'll go through this like I normally would, although I have to tell you that this is kind of an interactive talk when I did it the first time, because I do it mostly for this has been modified, but for people I mentor. And I think that when you're talking about mentoring students for research, there's not a lot of difference in my experience between doctoral students, medical students, scholarly project, masters. I'll go into that a little bit because I'm sure that's part of what I think people want to hear my opinion on. So we'll talk about that. The other thing is that I'm guessing that if you're in the room or watching this, that there's been a mentor in your life that has had an impact on you. And so I'm getting dressed this morning, and I was thinking about that, and so I just wanted to tell you a story, and this will attach itself at some point. And the story is that I was a second-year resident at the University of Michigan in physical medicine rehabilitation, and going through something of a crisis. I had spent time on the inpatient unit on peds, and then inpatient rehab, and then outpatient, and I was not happy. I had worked as an engineer for the last 2 years of my undergraduate degree, and one patient after another had a sameness to it, even that early in my residency program, that bothered me, and I had a hard time seeing myself as a physician, seeing patients, 5 days a week as my life's work. And I decided at that point that I maybe should start exploring other opportunities. There was one person who worked in the residency program with me. His name is Dan Barry, and he seemed like the happiest attending in the practice. He worked in the EMG lab, and he and I kind of hit it off because he was an engineer. That's what his PhD was in, and I have an engineering degree as well. And So that was kind of the basis of the relationship. And I went up to him and I said, I think I'm going to drop out of the residency program. This is not what I want to do with my life. And to paraphrase it just a little bit, he said, don't quit, do research. And he then, right there and then, got me a job as a consultant in some work that he had been doing. The reason, he was in the EMG lab on Wednesday. That was the entirety of his clinical work, was a half day a week. He read my first K award and edited it for me, part of which, by the way, for some of you may know, part of which he did while studying because he got accepted to NASA's astronaut program and has done 3 spacewalks since then. And actually throughout early part of his training, he was helping me with my grants while he was studying to be an astronaut now. And I'll tell you why I thought of him this morning was because one of the things I really enjoyed about Dan was that he wore jeans to work every day. And so my goal at that point became, I want to wear jeans to work. He had a tie that he kept in the EMG lab, one-shot tie, and I must have been there for 15 years. I guess he was only at Michigan for like 8, so I'm exaggerating. And he'd put the tie on, right? He always wore tennis shoes because he had a patent for Brooks running shoes. It was one of the things that made him financially independent enough that he could afford to be an astronaut. So he wore different multicolored tennis shoes, and he only saw patients a half a day a week. I decided that in honor of Dan, and because I'm always more comfortable in jeans anyway, I would wear jeans today. Wrong way. So just an outline of the talk is what's the ideal mentor, what the ideal mentor should do, the ideal student. And I think this all goes into it. I think that's where the point of how you mentor someone for research, common pitfalls, and if it works. And so if this was a room full of students, I would say, tell me what the qualities of the ideal mentor are. And I always think that since if I put a picture of Dan Barry up there, it wouldn't mean anything to people. So, what's our iconic mentor today is Yoda. So if you think about what it was about Yoda that made him a great mentor, we could go through this and so as opposed to, if you guys want to call out, you're welcome to. I can go through some of the things that I came up with, and I have to tell you that when I present this to the fellows in the K-12 grant that I run, usually we add things. So this list was shorter, and someone will come up with an idea. So if you're missing something, what I'll do is stop the presentation and add it in. It's because we can. And so, top qualities of an ideal mentor is a sincere interest in fostering the development and independence of the trainee. I think that's kind of a given. I put this in here on purpose, and I put it in here early on purpose because I think this is where mentors fall down very often. And I'll tell you that when I'm thinking about this from a medical-student relationship specifically, this is one of the places where there's a problem. And I think that the mentor has to gain from the relationship. If the mentor is not going to gain from the relationship, then my belief is that the relationship will fade. And the investment won't be there, and it's a unique individual who will continue to be involved with a mentor-mentee relationship, do a great job with that, and when not gaining from the relationship in some way. So it might be that it's the personal satisfaction of watching someone grow. I think it really needs to be more than that. I think what it really needs to be is the more about not just growth for the student, but the mentor getting something out of it, whether it be help with papers or help with some other aspect of their work. In the medical student realm, I think that if the medical students are focused on their own project, which is only peripherally interesting to their mentor, then there's a chance that after a while that mentor, the student's going to fade into the third year, and the mentor is going to fade into their own work, and inevitably you grow apart. Time. Now, this is interesting because I think the best mentors have no time. They just always find it. Right? And so I can't, no matter how busy a good mentor is, their door is open and they'll talk to you. It always works out, and I think that that's important. They have to have resources. They have to have the resources to support the student. They have to have resources, not just financial, but laboratory resources, friends, connections, a knowledge of the system, contacts, people that they talk to. They have to have expertise. I think they need to be unselfish. That's an interesting thing in a medical and a high-powered academic environment like this one, because what that might mean is they should be tenured. And as a matter of fact, in the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences, where I have a graduate faculty appointment, they don't really want people who are at an assistant professor level mentoring doctoral students. There's been an ongoing debate related to that because they're worried about what interest is going to go first. Management skills, and this is really the ability to give feedback is a critical aspect of being a good mentor, the ability to negotiate situations for you, or at least tell you how they would negotiate the situations in such a way that it helps you learn from them more than just how to run an assay or some other aspect of the research. A willingness to learn. I guess when I stop learning from my students is when I stop being a mentor. And then finally, self-confidence to know that I'm not losing a student on gaining a collaborator. They have to actively work towards, now this probably applies less to medical students, but in a graduate setting and a postdoc setting, they have to understand that they're not training someone who's going to compete with them. They're training someone who's going to collaborate with them. And unfortunately, I've seen that work in bad ways. So what are the top 10 things a mentor should do? Well, they should teach. Again, I think that the teaching really goes beyond just normal teaching. I think role modeling is important. I personally, people who know me know that my family is the most important part of my life, period. I have a lot of jobs, but if my wife or kids need me, and they call me, and I'll find a way to interrupt what I'm doing if I can in any way, and I'll stop it. And I do that on purpose in front of my students. I want them to see that it's not all about the research, that there's other aspects to your life. And so I think that that's part of what the role model is. Protect, keep away from scut. I don't think the Scut Monkey Handbook, and from a generational perspective, right? Does anybody remember this? It doesn't still exist though, right? It's now politically incorrect, but there's actually a monkey there. I don't know if you can see that on the slide, but this was, when you became a med student, when I was a med student, so we're talking about the late 80s, that you bought the Scut Monkey Handbook, which taught you how to handle all this crappy work that medical students were uniquely asked to do, and it really was. There's nothing about teaching. It was really about being the best Scut Monkey, so that at the end of the rotation, your resident would write you a really good letter. And you want to keep the scut away from the students the best way you can. This is, you need to give, or a good mentor needs to give. I think that and this is again in the medical student realm, very important. I think that ideally the medical students that we're working with who are trying to accomplish a project in a 2-year time frame, part-time, actually need the data. And they need the ideas. The problem is they don't know that they need either of those two things. No matter how many times Alan or Phil or I get up in front of the room and say, what you want to do is find a mentor who's working in your interest area and accept their ideas. They're going to come to us with their own ideas and say, can you help me get this accomplished? And then it gets away from what you'll gain out of the relationship almost immediately. And so giving them ideas, giving them data is the way to get things done. Introducing the student, so in the medical student realm, you want to introduce them to the chair of your department, because there's a decent chance that one of the reasons they're doing their rotation, their scholarly project with you, is because they want to go into your area. Or introduce them to the dean, the chair of another department, if that's where they want to work. So help them with the references. You want to guide them on what to avoid and what to do, provide criticism and praise. And I have so one of the doctoral students in my research laboratory is a Marine. And he wrote a paper he wrote a paper and sent it to 2 people. One person said, nice job, corrected some typos. And I thought it was a horrible job, and I shredded it. And because I was traveling and he was planning on submitting it, I emailed this and copied a couple of people because they needed to see that I wasn't comfortable having it go out. Came back and I talked to him, and he then sent me the second draft of the paper, and he put this quote in his email, that there's honesty and there's brutality, but there's no such thing as brutal honesty. I don't know if I believe that. And I asked him where he got it from, and he said it was the first one. He's at Ellis Island, I think, is what it was, and it was a Marine, his Marine drill sergeant who told him that. I would rather that we err on the side of brutality than on the side of you got to tell the students what's going on. By the way, I read the second draft of that this morning, and it's much, much better. And he thanked me for it. And the other mentor who corrected typos, I'd rather, again, brutal honesty is better than anything else. So then we go to the top qualities of a student that we look for. And so again, I'm trying to go with, and remember, it's a generational thing, but Hermione Granger from everybody. Does everybody know who that is? No? All right. So I'm sorry. Did everybody know who Yoda was? Some of you weren't here for Yoda. So Hermione Granger is from the Harry Potter series. And I'm sure you've all heard of Harry Potter, and she's a student who knows all the answers in class, is a great learner, knows everything that she needs to know. And so when I thought of the ideal student, I thought of her. So the top qualities of a student, I think, again, we all know, and we could populate this list, is a desire to learn and gain independence. Hardworking, including tasks that seem like scut. So this is an important differentiation for me, and I think for everyone. So at what point am I giving a student scut, and at what point am I giving a student work that helps them? So I remember when I started here, and I did a postdoctoral fellowship for my first year, I was doing biomechanics work. So you put markers on people, they move, and then a camera records them and tries to track the markers. At that time, the technology was horrible, and I had to go through hours of film clicking on these little data points. So is that scut, or is that actually something that's useful to me. And I would argue that it's completely useful to me, that unless you know kind of how to do everything in your research laboratory and can do it yourself, that you can't advise a student to do it. And so it's not scut to ask a student to do basic laboratory techniques. It's not scut to ask a student to digitize markers. Scut is emptying the garbage on some level, which, by the way, as a med student, I probably had to do that a couple of times. That was in the Scut Monkey handbook. And so they ought to be willing to do hard work and willing to accept that busy work that is way beneath what their intelligence may be, is part of research and part of any job. Hopefully they're a self-starter, willingness to ask questions, even easy ones. I'd like students who are deadline driven, so that because as a mentor personally, and I know from the people in the room, we're all so busy that that if they're not deadline driven, then it's not possible for us to be on top of them like we need to. Smart is good, although I'll tell you that some of the, I've had grad students, doctoral students in my lab who were not as smart as other doctoral students, but they worked, and they worked hard, and they read, and they read, and they worked, and they worked, and it really was probably more important than their innate intelligence on some level. I want to digress for just a second and go back to top qualities of the mentor. There's one thing that's not on there that I meant to add on, and I didn't do it this morning, and that is reading. I think the single most important thing that the mentor can do is be willing to read for their students, read immediately and read often, because that is actually, the written word is how research is done. It's grants, it's papers, it's every aspect of research, it's proposals for your scholarly project. And so, my graduate students know I'm a little bit of an exercise fanatic. I work out on my elliptical every single morning for at least 45 minutes, and it's when I read. And they know if they give me their doctoral dissertation on Friday, that I'll have it read by the next Friday. They know if they give me a paper, the chances are I'll have it read in 2 or 3 days. And that's how you mentor in many environments. And so I think reading is really a very important thing that we don't talk about enough. But it's the way to communicate, to help them write their grants, to help them write their proposals, to help them write their papers. Hopefully they're good at classwork. These are 4 essential ingredients of effective mentoring. I think this is more textbook stuff. I wanted to throw it in there. Everything I think I talked about goes to this, but it's trust, communication, respect, and fairness. I think choosing a mentor or choosing a trainee is a very important task, and it's something that everyone should spend time on. I don't think that we have enough time to evaluate the medical student and say, boy, is this someone who I want to attach myself to, because they come to us, they're eager, they're fit medical students. Although I tell you what, if you call one of the first-year course instructors and say, is this, what do I need to know? It might save some time, and I think the student should actually find out from previous trainees whether you're a good mentor, and that would certainly make our jobs a little bit easier in the scholarly project. I think you want to negotiate up front the time. How much time is an expectation for this? I encourage in the scholarly project realm again the students to say, if you take me on, I'm going to take 2 electives. I'm going to do them, this is the time I'm going to do them, this is the time I'm going to do them. Here's what I'll do during the course of the 2 years that I'm working, so that everybody understands up front what they're going to get out of the student, because it's hard to do research, it's hard to do scholarly work while you're going through clinical rotations. Where are you going to do the work? Are the students going to do it at home and email it to you? Are the students going to do it in your lab? Where is it going to be done is an important part of the negotiations. You're a grad student in my lab, you work at my lab, right? It's not until you've proven to me that you're really the kind of self-starter that can work at home that I say, fine, work at home for the day. I want you to be there. Part of the reason is because there's work like subject testing to be done. I think the other thing that is a really important thing to know, especially for our medical students, is do they see this as part of their career path? Is this an obligation, and they've picked you because it's the easiest path, or what's their career goals, so that to the best of your ability you can tie it in? I had a med student who came to work with me who was interested in going into OBGYN. And I said, what are you doing here? And they had heard from another medical student, this is before the Scholarly Project, that I was a fun person to work with, that sometimes it ends up in awards. And I had information on spinal cord injured patients and their life satisfaction and from a bunch of measures and whether they had kids or not. Right, and infertility is a big problem. She did a project. She actually ended up winning awards. She ended up doing more research. So you never know, but it's all because of a career path discussion that I think is absolutely essential. And then chemistry, I think, is really important. If they rub you the wrong way from the beginning, there's a reason for that. So the pitfalls. Now, how about this reference? Anybody know this reference? Yeah, Training Day, right? So this is this nice innocent cop who meets this really, really bad cop. And in a 24-hour period of time, his life is ruined, right? And he takes him under his wing. He mentors him. It's just all the wrong mentoring. So what can go wrong in this? Well, trainee is cheap labor with good skills. Why not keep it that way? Why promote this person? Why let this person go under your wing? Get out from under your protection. And that, I think, is especially true not with medical students, but with postdocs. Some postdocs who are here, and they're by the nature of their visa, they need to remain postdocs. It works out very conveniently. Excessively prescriptive in assigning tasks. I think you do that as a fallback for you. You want to give your students global, a kind of a direction and let them figure it out. I think you can get too prescriptive in this, although once you get to a point where there's a problem, then you need to be very prescriptive and you need to write it out so that you can have something to document to take forward should that relationship not work out. The assigned tasks do not benefit the student, right? They're doing Scott. That's a pitfall. Trainee approaching independence may compete with or steal the work. And this is, unfortunately, this is what I see in my department more. But this concern that as someone grows into independence, that there's now all of a sudden someone else competing. I don't think that's something we worry about with medical students so much because they're going to go into residency, they'll disappear for 3 years, and the science will change. Mentor pressures the trainee to accomplish work or obtain results that are unrealistic. And I think we see this from at least the medical student's perspective. And then as I've talked to medical students who have problems, and I think, again, Phil and Al can chirp in here anytime they want, that this is a real issue for some of our students. So the scholarly project is a tough one. Like I said, the time constraints are real on the medical students, and so there have to be realistic expectations. It's clear that one of the students I talked to the other day, their mentor expected them to carry out independently a basic lab experiment that required constant troubleshooting, and it just wasn't going to happen. It really wasn't going to work for them. And so I think that this is something that we're negotiating up front really makes a difference. Right. Absolutely. Right, and that's what we talked about. I want to do this idea. I'm going to carry out a double-blind randomized controlled trial, on an interferon in liver disease. You can't do that. Right, and so that's absolutely true. And unfortunately, that's again where the mentor's got to say from the very beginning, you can't get this done. That, I think, is hard because our faculty want to help our students, and they don't realize that saying okay to a research project that has a chance of success of less than 1% is not a good thing to do. Mentor expects the trainee to perform tasks that assist the mentor's progress versus helping develop the trainee. And again, sometimes this is subtle. It's a little bit different than the assigned tasks not benefit the student. A thing here could be, and again, not as relevant in the medical student realm, but a book chapter. A third author on a book chapter, sometimes that helps the student, but sometimes if that what that really helps is the mentor who doesn't want to write it anyway, got asked, but felt like they had to say yes. They want a good first draft. They want someone to work on it with. And so it can be a very subtle distinction. Mentor pursues a level of personal relationship that's not desired by the trainee. I think you have to put that one up there as an obligation. Hopefully that's not happening. Some trainees understand the need for high levels of authorship to advance. So here are the student problems now. but are unrealistic about the contributions required to generate that level of credit. So I work with a student. They'll come into my lab for a summer. They'll do a little review of the literature, and they want to be first author on the paper. And so and for them it's a given. First authorship's a given, let alone any authorship at all when they haven't had a level of involvement that by any definition would meet that. I think I tend to be generous with authorship, maybe to a fault. I think that they really it's something to negotiate up front, and that I think we'll get that into the top 10. Mentor, after unsuccessfully assigning autonomous work to the training, may need to do a rescue the project, which should come with a reassessment of the authorship. So you give someone a project, the student doesn't get it done. It's part of your grant. You have to get it done, right? The student kind of watches everybody do the work and then says, well, you said I was going to be an author on this. And so I think this is something else. And there's many more pitfalls. I think Al brought them up. I don't know if anyone wants to share additional. But unrealistic expectations on the student's part, these are some of the ones that I ran into the most. So how do we avoid problems? Well, honesty, frank discussions, frequent ask for help. If you don't understand the reason for a decision, ask. That's what I tell the students, but it just goes on the mentor side too. I think the problem that happens with our scholarly project has to do with frequency. So my doors open in my lab. My doctoral students walk into my office all the time. It's just a given. In fact, what starts to happen now that I'm only at my lab on Tuesdays and Fridays is that there's a line, and that's okay. It's okay. It's just right now that's what it's got to be. The problem with the scholarly project is this doesn't happen frequently enough. And as soon as you get that 3-month void where you haven't talked to your student, then the next conversation becomes a little awkward, and it's this self-perpetuating thing where the student doesn't talk to you, you don't talk to the student, you've moved on to another area, and there's no great way to actually resolve this. And by the way, no great way to resolve that particular aspect of the relationship except for to then force yourself to sit down, and now all the rules have changed. You had this great relationship, you're working together, they disappear for 3 months of surgery, 3 months of internal medicine, and all of a sudden everything's a little bit different. And then the slide here, which I'm thinking everybody gets this one, right? Right, okay. Yeah? All right, good. I have to, Hermione Granger, if I put up something from my youth, they're not going to get, the students I work with aren't going to get this, is transparency. So, you don't want to be hiding behind the curtain, pulling the cords, not having them understand why it is that you're asking them to do what you're doing. You want to be as transparent as possible as you go along. So what happens if it works? Well, the mentor gains low-cost skilled labor, enhanced productivity, specific technical skills that they can learn. In my lab, we started doing some ultrasound research, and the students just quickly got very good at it and were able to teach me things, new ideas. The student gets the intensive teaching, skill development, research resources, the collaborative milieu. They can get increasing demands on their own time, which is good, and then networking and introduction. So expectations, this is all I have on this slide. For the scholarly project, I don't, I think that the expectations, absolutely.
I realize that most of us are mentors at that point. Not everybody's mentors, but they actually enjoy it. They do feel they get something out of it. So, from a purist perspective, what does that mean? Okay? But from a practical perspective, in today's environment, chair of the department in annual evaluations or in time allotments or in currency. You know what I'm driving.
I completely agree with you. You're not the first person who's brought this up in the topic of a conversation that mentoring is not valued to the degree that it should be here, and so it's a fascinating topic. I think that it becomes more relevant. So it becomes more relevant as we talk about scholarly projects, medical student research, than maybe in a PhD realm, because at a point where in my research lab, no one has to reward me for that mentoring, because the PhD relationship, 4 years of someone working, they make me. And I get so much out of it. They're so smart. But when you're mentoring a medical student who has a limited capacity to get something done, and the only thing that happens is that so you get ECUs. I don't know what I don't know what they're worth anymore. I'm a department chair, and I don't know what they're worth, right? I don't know that it actually lends itself to reward to the faculty. So that's not that being the end all is not enough. We give out. We've talked about this a little bit. We give out rewards for the best student, and I think Al had the great idea once of well, it was more than once as a great idea, but of having the mentor introduce the student at the award presentation, which is a way of honoring the mentor as well as honoring the student. The unfortunate thing was the mentors waxed on so long that we couldn't get to the presentations with that. I can't remember why we stopped doing that, but we had a good reason for stopping. Absolutely.
Get a little departmental show, say disability over what you do and how you, as a person or teacher, approach that student.
Well, that's a great idea. I'm going to steal that one. I'm open for my department. That helps the residents, the medical student. I mean, I'm open to ideas on how we do this at a medical school level. I do think that it would be great to do that. We list the mentors in the brochure, but at a departmental level, and it doesn't necessarily seem to me like it would have to be a cost expensive. I think if
That is what I'm driving at. I just think that we have multiple functions in academia. That's why we do academia. Just want to get that
right.
some level. So my point is, okay, I think we need a little more thinking about this because, because I also work in the diversity area. I'm always concerned about mentoring, and then I'm working on this term competent mentoring. And if you're a mentor, does anybody know you're a mentor? Does anybody care you're a mentor? Does anybody care whether you do it right or wrong or how you do it? You do understand.
Absolutely. No.
So I started to think a little bit more about how you get a little more visibility on these functions. Okay.
I think I think it's something we need to look at further, and I think that an easy thing that we can do is at least a scholarly project related to the scholarly project is that we're going through the process right now of evaluating the scholarly project final reports for the class of 2009. And we are assigning levels, and there'll be honorable mention and there'll be awards. And I think that the one thing we can certainly do is email the department chair with a copy to Art, saying that this student won an award under the mentorship of your faculty, and that's something we should definitely start doing. And I think we can be open to alternative suggestions and additional suggestions. That's a great point.
It's my understanding that the idea of the scholarly project came from Dean.
Yes.
And he's certainly been, in a very tangible way, been generous with the funding of some of the research. And that's kind of an obvious way that he's been very generous. I wonder whether this idea of showing, recognizing the work of the faculty as mentors, something that we, in a sense, want him to
And that's a great point. I'm going to bring it up in one of the dean's staff meetings, and we can talk about it. I think that that's a simple thing that we can do. He has been generous with support. Now I think it's a belt tightening time, and so I was trying to get through like one hour lecture meeting without actually having to say something about that, and I blew it. Sorry, but. That's not bad. That's certainly a record for my last 40 meetings. It's a great idea. That's a great point. Anything else? So again, at the scholarly project level, I think that really the most important things to know as a mentor, I've talked about it, I think, already. One is, unless this student is a superstar and there is a clear-cut path for the way they can complete their own research project, saying yes to their idea is not a good idea for them. The best thing that you can do is kind of hook them onto yours. I think that we all have to understand what realistic expectations are, and the way I kind of think about it is something along of what could you get done in about an hour a week, and then a few concentrated segments during the course of medical school, where maybe during an easier rotation, they can go down to, they can be up to 4 hours a week, and then for a month or two at a time, they can be up to this many, hours a week. There are students who have gone who have worked on weekends, who have done, and they'll do that. And what will happen is they'll finish what you ask them to finish faster, and then you can give them more. I think having realistic expectations for the students that are working with us is critical, and then negotiating it up front, talking about when you expect them to work in your lab, how you expect them to work in your lab, or when you expect them to get this done, including the scholarly project directors early on, especially if the idea is unique or doesn't fall into classical research. All of these things are things that I think we could do that are important from mentoring medical students in this area.
I know you have the quarterly reports from Scotland, where update you as a way of keeping people in mind. But in your experience, have you found that quote-unquote mentoring contracts are beneficial, where you are more specific by time after you get this done, or is that just business?
So I have no experience with mentoring contracts. I've mentored 30 PhD students and that many masters and a bunch of postdocs, and I've never used a contract. I think that what I believe, and my feeling is, obviously I guess, that would probably be of limited value. That it's about the relationship. It's not probably about a piece of paper. Where it would probably be helpful is if they fall down on the job and don't do anything. One of the contracts that we try to make clear to the students from the beginning is that we expect them to have some activity on their scholarly project. At least they can't go more than 3 months with no activity. And the quarterly reports, if it says no activity, we want to know what's planned next. They're sent right along to the mentor. I think that, by the way, for those people interested in mentoring related research, we could do a randomized controlled trial of the scholarly project with a contract and without a contract very easily. That's the kind of thing we could do. It would be interesting to see. I think it probably helps when the students are not doing the work. But how it helps, I don't know. And so if there's people who have more experience with those contracts than I do, I'm open to it. There is a, let me see what I have next. Yeah, so there's a ton of resources in mentoring. I think there's almost too much. This is a AAMC publication on the compact between biomedical graduate students and their research advisors, and it has this very explicit, here are the commitments of the graduate students. I acknowledge that I have primary responsibility for completion of my degree. And I'm not going to read through all of these. It's a good publication, and this is all going to end up online, this whole talk. So this will all be readily available. If you email me, I'd be happy to email you this document as well, the PDF for this. And then it also shows the commitments of the advisors, the research advisors. And this fits very well with the scholarly project and with everything we talked about. It's not a contract, although I think one of the resources might show you how you make that into a contract. It's just a commitment. You could certainly sign the bottom of the page, and there might even be a way that they recommend that at the end. No. There's another publication that I think does that. And so it's one of the resources that you can use in this. As you go forward. And then another resource clearly at Pitt is the Institute for Clinical Research Education, and they have a whole mentoring resource website which will give you the AAMC and more. And so there's no shortage of resources on this. And my guess is there's a contract here as well related to going through this. But the mentoring spotlight and some stories and other things that you can get off of there. And that's actually my talk. So there's about 12 minutes left, and we can talk more about the contract or anything else that we might have. And just for those people who are coming in a little bit late, I feel the need to share with you that the story I opened up with was my personal mentor, a guy named Dan Barry, who wore jeans to work every single day. And I said, I just got to get there some point. And normally on Friday I'm at my research lab, which is why I don't get to come to these noon lectures. I have to be there. And I normally wear jeans on Friday, and I thought, well, I'm not going to let this lecture about mentoring when this guy mentored me stop me from doing that. So go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on the contracts thing. The neuroscience agency, we had standardized that as part of the process. Students and mentors would do a contract. It hasn't been that helpful, I don't think. I think it's become a formality. I don't think it drives the relationship. Nobody speaks to it anyway. I have students don't even do it. So I'm not sure how much value it is for us.
And I think that the other thing that we've struggled with, that Al, Phil, and Cynthia and I have struggled with, really is this is a culture change at the medical school. That's what this is. Saying that you have to do a scholarly project from the middle of your second year to the middle of your fourth year is a culture change. It's saying to the unit, it's saying to the rotation directors, by the way, your student needs to multitask now a little bit. They need to not only do all the things they have to accomplish for your rotation, but there's always this other thing hanging out there. I'm afraid of overburdening mentors. And the contract thing I think we talked about early on, and we wanted to make this as easy for the mentor as possible. So I'm not surprised by that answer. If you need a contract with a medical student on some level, then it's not going to work. And so the students who need it, it won't help, and the students who don't need it, the contract will work perfectly. Any other comments or questions?
At the end of the year, this time of year, when the students are turning things in, it's been a little vague on what level of completeness is expected for a project.
One thing that we have that we fight with on a kind of a regular basis is I wonder if I'm going to be able to do this. Anybody know the address for the zone? So the final report instructions are critical. Is critical reading material from my perspective, and maybe it's not worth me going into that. The answer to the question. Bring them up. Okay, I'm getting direction, which yeah. Okay, so if I go, I'm trying to think of. Okay, help me. I have this all bookmarked on mine. Oh boy. So in the documents section under the scholarly project, there's instructions for the final report. And the instructions for the final report, the way we put this together was to say that, I guess I needed to tell it to remember. No, it doesn't help. Is that right? I'll have to remember to email the zone people about that. So there's all this stuff that. So if we go to this, actually, this view might actually be helpful for the first time ever. So there's the addendum. So there's some introductory stuff. What did you do? What was your role in the project? What was your involvement with the project? Then we have what we call the scholarly project paper or product and the addendum. Okay? And if they have a published paper, it's easy. You give us a copy of your published paper. Tell us about other studies you've done during medical school. And if it was published or submitted a long time ago, tell us what's happened since then. So that's easy. The second thing is if it involved unpublished research or quality assurance work. And in that case, what we say is we want you to write it up as if it was a manuscript. We want a limit of 5,000 words of text. We want figures and tables. And then we want, again, a description of other studies that might have been undertaken, information on problems encountered, and future work that might be done to complete the study. So the answer to the question is, the key points in my mind are, number one, as the mentor, did they do enough from your perspective? Were you involved with them? And by the way, it's too late to ask the question when you get to the final report. So the assumption is that they did. That they were working with you, that there was one roadblock or another, that maybe they didn't get completed, they're part of a larger project that ran into a roadblock. And so if once you say yes, then the next step is to have them write something as if they got data from it. So I have one of the faculty in my department supervised a medical student. It was one of those times where it was a junior faculty member, and a medical student had an idea, and they got 3 subjects. And it's not the kind of study that lends itself to analysis of 3 subjects, but you can write the methods. You can write the introduction, you can write the methods, you can present with results on 3 subjects, and you can discuss them. That's enough. That's clearly enough. And does that answer your? And then just to finish this out, we get some people who don't write a research. Their scholarly project is to develop a medical sign language guide, and that's okay. We've said that's okay. For them, they need to have a paper that clearly details the indication of the scholarly activity, the rationale that led or supported this work, and it has to be referenced. So they also have to write a document that indicates the scholarship behind what they've produced. That help?
Yeah, my situation's a little bit unique. I can talk about that.
We'd be happy to talk to you. That's the easy answer to the question is we'd be happy to talk to you anytime. Other questions or comments? Well, I appreciate you guys coming out here at a lunch hour. Thanks.